An atheist millionaire's miraculous recovery leads to life-changing discovery and faith. Marcus Stone stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, gazing down at the city below with the calculated detachment of someone who had long since stopped seeing people as anything more than numbers on a spreadsheet. The Wall Street Journal lay open on his mahogany desk, its headline reading "Stone Pharmaceuticals Under Investigation, Drug Safety Concerns Surface." God. Let me tell you about God, he had declared at the shareholders meeting just hours earlier. God is what weak people invented to explain what they couldn't control. I've built a billion-dollar empire by believing in one thing only. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Faith doesn't cure diseases, our drugs do. Prayer doesn't save lives, profit drives innovation. Little did he know that within 24 hours, these words would come back to haunt him in ways he could never have imagined. As he raised his glass of 30-year-old scotch in a silent toast to another record quarter, fate was already setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter his world and rebuild it in ways that defied everything he believed was possible. Before you continue watching this touching journey of faith and redemption, take a moment to share where you're watching from and hit like if this story resonates with you. Marcus Stone was not born into wealth. At 55, his steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes carried the weight of someone who had clawed his way to the top. Born in a middle-class family in Cleveland, Ohio, he watched his father, a small pharmacy owner, lose everything to larger corporations. The day their family pharmacy closed, 14-year-old Marcus made a vow that would shape his destiny. He would never be powerless again. Through relentless determination, he earned a full scholarship to Yale, studying business and pharmaceutical sciences. His classmates remembered him as the student who never attended parties, instead spending nights in the library or working part-time jobs. Success isn't given, he often said. It's calculated, measured, and seized. By 30, he had founded Stone Pharmaceuticals with a modest inheritance from his grandmother. His business model was ruthlessly efficient: identify essential medications, streamline production, and maximize profits. The company's first major success came from acquiring patents for critical heart medications and optimizing their production costs. Within 5 years, Stone Pharmaceuticals became known for making necessary medications profitable. His personal life reflected his business philosophy. Twice divorced, his marriages failed under the weight of his obsession with work. His first wife, Rebecca, left after 3 years, claiming he was married to his spreadsheets. His second wife, Jennifer, lasted 5 years before departing with a generous settlement. His daughter from his first marriage, Catherine, now 25, maintained minimal contact, appearing only at mandatory corporate events. Stone's views on religion were equally uncompromising. In interviews, he proudly identified as a militant atheist, often quoting scientific studies to dismiss religious beliefs. Religion, he would say, is a comfort blanket for those who can't face reality. Ideal in facts, figures, and measurable outcomes, his annual speeches at pharmaceutical conferences were famous for incorporating digs at faith healing and alternative medicine. His luxury penthouse apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side housed an impressive art collection, yet notably lacked any personal photos. Employees spoke of his photographic memory for financial reports, but inability to remember their names. His closest relationship was with his executive assistant of 15 years, Thomas Wright, who managed every aspect of his life with military precision. Stone's reputation in the business world was a complex mixture of admiration and fear. Forbes magazine once described him as brilliantly ruthless, noting how he had turned Stone Pharmaceuticals into a Fortune 500 company through aggressive acquisitions and strategic patent enforcement. His annual charity gala raised millions for medical research, though cynics noted how these donations always aligned with tax advantages and marketing opportunities. In boardrooms, his presence commanded absolute attention. His signature three-piece suits and platinum Patek Philippe watch became symbols of success in the pharmaceutical industry. Young executives studied his business tactics, while ethics professors used his company's practices as case studies in moral compromise. Despite his wealth, Stone lived by strict routines. Every morning began with a 5 a.m. workout in his private gym, followed by a breakfast of steel-cut oats and black coffee. He took pride in making rational decisions untainted by emotional considerations. His personal mantra, displayed in his office in steel letters, read, "In numbers we trust." Yet beneath this carefully constructed facade of certainty and control, There were moments brief and quickly dismissed when Stone would stand at his window late at night, looking at the city lights, feeling a peculiar emptiness he couldn't quantify or solve with his usual mathematical precision. These moments of doubt, however, were always pushed aside by the next morning's market opening bell. Stone Pharmaceuticals occupied a gleaming 60-story building in Manhattan's financial district, its glass facade reflecting the city's ambition. Inside, the corporate culture mirrored its founder's philosophy, efficiency above all. The company's motto, advancing health through innovation, was displayed in the lobby, though employees quietly joked that it should read advancing wealth through innovation. The company's rapid rise caught attention for its aggressive strategy in acquiring smaller pharmaceutical companies. Under Stone's leadership, the firm specialized in purchasing patents for essential medications and optimizing their production, a practice critics called profit engineering. The board of directors, handpicked by Stone, consisted of industry veterans known for prioritizing shareholder value above all else. Dr. Sarah Williams stood out as an anomaly in this profit-driven environment. As head of research and development, her reputation for ethical research and patient safety made her both respected and viewed with suspicion. A brilliant scientist with degrees from Stanford and Johns Hopkins, she had joined Stone Pharmaceuticals 5 years ago, attracted by the company's state-of-the-art research facilities and promised autonomy in drug development. The tension between Sarah's ethical standards and the company's profit-driven approach came to a head during the development of VitaLife, a groundbreaking pain medication. Initial trials showed promising results, but Sarah's team identified concerning side effects in long-term use. Her repeated requests for extended trials were met with increasing resistance from the board, particularly from James Richardson, the chief financial officer, who saw the delays as unnecessary costs. The corporate hierarchy was clear and unforgiving. Weekly executive meetings in the top-floor conference room were known for their intensity. Stone sat at the head of a 20-foot mahogany table, flanked by Richardson and Michael Brooks, the chief operating officer. These meetings often ended with someone's career in jeopardy, earning the conference room the nickname the execution chamber. Despite the pressure, Stone Pharmaceuticals maintained an impressive facade of corporate responsibility. The company's annual report highlighted its charitable initiatives and commitment to global health, though careful reading revealed these programs often coincided with market expansion strategies. The Puerto Rico department, led by the shrewd Victoria Hayes, expertly managed the company's image, turning even controversial decisions into positive press. The research division occupied 5 floors of the building, employing over 300 scientists. While well-funded, the department operated under strict timelines and profit expectations. Researchers learned to navigate between scientific integrity and corporate demands, though this balance increasingly tilted toward the latter under Stone's aggressive growth targets. Sarah's position became increasingly precarious as she gathered evidence about VitaLife's risks. Her team's latest findings showed potential cardiac complications in a small but significant percentage of users. When she brought these concerns to Stone directly, his response was characteristic numbers. "Dr. Williams, show me the cost-benefit analysis. Everything else is just speculation." The company's legal department, occupying the 48th floor, worked tirelessly to protect Stone's empire. Led by Robert Turner, a former FDA attorney, the team specialized in navigating regulatory requirements while minimizing corporate liability. Their offices were nicknamed the Shield Wall for their role in defending the company's interests. As pressure mounted to launch VitaLife, the contrast between Sarah's ethical concerns and the company's profit-driven culture reached a breaking point. In a tense board meeting, she stood alone against the launch timeline, while Stone watched the debate with cold calculation. "Dr. Williams," he finally interrupted, "perhaps you've forgotten that we're not running a charity. We're running a business." Little did anyone know that this clash of values would soon catalyze a chain of events that would shake Stone Pharmaceuticals to its core, forcing everyone, especially its founder, to confront the true cost of putting profits above people. The VitaLife approval process moved forward with the ruthless efficiency that characterized Stone Pharmaceuticals. In the gleaming boardroom on the top floor, Marcus Stone presided over a meeting that would later be remembered as the moment everything began to unravel. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished table as executives presented their cases for fast-tracking the drug's approval. James Richardson, the CFO, stood before a wall of screens displaying profit projections. Vitalife represents a potential market value of $4.2 billion in the first year alone. Every month of delay costs us approximately $350 million in lost revenue. His presentation highlighted competing products and emphasized the narrowing window of opportunity. But behind the scenes, a complex web of influence had already been set in motion. Robert Turner, the legal head, had orchestrated a series of consulting fees paid to key FDA officials through shell companies. These payments, disguised as legitimate consulting arrangements, ensured that Vitalife's application would receive priority review status. Sarah Williams sat silently during these meetings, her research files containing damning evidence a 12% rate of severe cardiac complications in long-term trial participants deliberately buried in statistical noise. Her team had documented these findings meticulously, but their reports were repeatedly lost in administrative reviews or dismissed as statistically insignificant. The pressure to suppress negative data came from multiple directions. Department heads received bonus structures tied to Vitalife's approval, while researchers who raised concerns found their funding cut or were reassigned to less significant projects. The message was clear: cooperation would be rewarded, resistance would be costly. In a private meeting with Stone, Sarah made one final attempt to halt the process. "Mr. Stone, these cardiac risks are real. We're talking about people's lives." Stone's response was ice cold. "Dr. Williams, do you know how many people die from chronic pain? We're helping more than we're hurting. That's just mathematics." The corruption reached deeper than even Sarah suspected. Michael Brooks, the COO, had orchestrated a sophisticated data manipulation scheme. Trial results were selectively reported, adverse events were reclassified under different categories, and statistical analyses were carefully crafted to minimize red flags. The altered data painted Vitalife as a breakthrough in pain management with minimal side effects. The FDA review process, usually rigorous and time-consuming, moved with unusual speed. Key officials, their pockets lined with consulting fees, raised only perfunctory questions. Concerns from lower-level reviewers were overruled or buried in bureaucratic procedures. The agency's internal whistleblower hotline mysteriously malfunctioned during crucial weeks of the review. Stone watched this orchestrated dance with satisfaction. In his mind, this was simply business efficiency removing unnecessary obstacles to progress. He had long since mastered the art of rationalizing such decisions. If the drug helped the majority, weren't a few acceptable risks worth the greater good? Besides, the legal department had already prepared ironclad liability waivers and settlement structures for potential lawsuits. The final approval meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Sarah, knowing what was at stake, made one last desperate move. She compiled a comprehensive report of all the suppressed data and sent it to both the FDA and several medical journals. However, her email was intercepted by its security, acting on standing orders to monitor potential corporate espionage. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office to find her access cards deactivated and security waiting to escort her from the building. The official reason: breach of confidentiality agreements. Her research files had been confiscated, her team reassigned, and her reputation in the industry was about to be systematically destroyed through a carefully planned smear campaign. As she was led out of the building, Sarah locked eyes with Stone, who watched from his executive floor with the detached interest of someone observing a minor incident far below. Neither knew that this moment would later be seen as the first domino in a chain of events that would transform both their lives irrevocably. The first death was reported on a Tuesday morning. Linda Martinez, a 42-year-old mother of 3 from Phoenix, collapsed during her daughter's soccer game. The autopsy revealed severe cardiac complications, exactly the side effects Sarah had warned about. Within days, similar reports began surfacing across the country. Stone Pharmaceuticals' crisis management team sprang into action. Victoria Hayes, the PR director, crafted a careful narrative. These incidents were isolated cases likely due to pre-existing conditions or improper usage. The legal team, led by Robert Turner, began quietly reaching out to affected families with settlement offers bundled with strict non-disclosure agreements. The media initially accepted the company's explanations, their coverage tempered by Stone Pharmaceuticals' significant advertising budget and powerful legal threats. However, as the death toll climbed, Independent medical researchers began noticing patterns that couldn't be dismissed. Emergency rooms across the country reported increasing cases of Vitalife-related cardiac events. James Richardson orchestrated a financial shield, moving assets through a complex network of subsidiaries. The board of directors received daily briefings on containment strategies, while Stone himself maintained a carefully crafted public image of concerned but confident leadership. "We stand by the safety of Vitalife," he declared in press conferences, "and we're thoroughly investigating any reported incidents." Behind closed doors, the atmosphere at Stone Pharmaceuticals turned toxic. Employees who had participated in the cover-up began seeking legal counsel. Internal documents disappeared from servers, and suspicious gaps appeared in email archives. The research department, stripped of Sarah's leadership, struggled to explain the mounting evidence of deliberate data manipulation. Sarah Williams, though fired, hadn't remained silent. Working with consumer protection lawyers, she meticulously documented everything she remembered about the suppressed research. Her reputation in shambles due to Stone's smear campaign, she found few willing to listen initially. But as casualties mounted, her warnings gained credibility. The first major blow came when the Boston Globe published a devastating expose. A junior researcher, conscience-stricken, had provided reporters with internal emails discussing the cardiac risks. The story detailed how Stone Pharmaceuticals had systematically buried negative trial results and bribed officials. The pharmaceutical empire's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Stone's response was characteristic, aggressive, and unapologetic. He launched a counter-offensive, questioning the credibility of his accusers and emphasizing Vitalife's benefits in any medical advancement. He argued, "There are always risks. We can't halt progress because of a few unfortunate incidents." But the truth couldn't be contained. Families of victims began organizing, sharing stories that painted a devastating picture. Maria Thompson, a hospital chaplain whose husband died after 3 months on Vitalife, became a powerful voice for the victims. Her quiet dignity in interviews contrasted sharply with Stone's corporate defensiveness. The FDA, under public pressure, launched an investigation. Officials who had accepted bribes began cooperating with authorities, hoping to avoid prosecution. The web of corruption that had facilitated Vitalife's approval slowly unraveled, exposing a system rotten to its core. Stone remained defiant, even as his empire began to crumble. In what would become an infamous CNBC interview, he coldly stated, "Show me any revolutionary drug that hasn't had some casualties. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs." The public's reaction was swift and furious. As the crisis deepened, Stone's behavior became increasingly erratic. He demanded absolute loyalty from his executives, even as evidence of wrongdoing mounted. His private office became a command center for what he called strategic defense, but was essentially a desperate attempt to maintain control of a rapidly deteriorating situation. If Marcus Stone's journey of redemption and faith touches your heart, take a moment to support us with a like. Every click helps share this powerful message of transformation with others who might need it. The night that changed everything was unseasonably cold for October. Marcus Stone left his office at 11:47 p.m., ignoring calls from his crisis management team about mounting public outrage. His Mercedes S-Class purred through Manhattan streets, its driver tense with barely contained fury after another day of defending his crumbling empire. Earlier that evening, CNN had aired a devastating interview with a former FDA official detailing the corruption behind Vitalife's approval. Stone's phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from board members demanding emergency meetings. His response had been to turn it off, something he hadn't done in 20 years of business. The irony wasn't lost on him when he reached for the glove compartment and pulled out a bottle of Vitalife. The same medication that was destroying his company's reputation was the only thing keeping his stress headaches at bay. He dry swallowed 2 pills, his hands tighter on the steering wheel as he accelerated onto the FDR drive. The accident happened in seconds. A taxi swerved to avoid a stalled car, cutting across Stone's lane. In any other circumstance, Stone's reflexes might have saved him. But the combination of fatigue, stress, and Vitalife's known side effect of delayed reaction time proved fatal. His Mercedes clipped the taxi's rear, sending his vehicle into an uncontrollable spin. The impact with the guardrail was devastating. Metal screamed against metal as the luxury car flipped multiple times before coming to rest on its roof. The same safety features that made the S-Class one of the world's safest vehicles kept Stone alive, but only barely. Emergency responders would later marvel at how the passenger compartment remained largely intact while the rest of the car was demolished. Stone drifted in and out of consciousness as firefighters worked to extract him from the wreckage. Through the haze of pain and shock, he heard fragments of their conversation: spinal trauma, possible internal bleeding, get him to Presbyterian. The bitter irony of being rushed to a hospital whose pain management protocol relied heavily on Vitalife wasn't lost on him, even in his semi-conscious state. The emergency room at New York Presbyterian burst into controlled chaos when they recognized their patient. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the attending physician, faced an immediate ethical dilemma. The standard protocol for trauma patients included Vitalife, but she had just read the latest reports about its cardiac risks. Her decision to use alternative pain management would later prove crucial to Stone's survival. The initial diagnosis was devastating severe spinal cord injury, multiple fractures, and internal injuries requiring immediate surgery. The medical team worked through the night, their efforts complicated by the fact that their patient's own product had become a liability rather than a help. Stone's heart showed signs of the same stress patterns that had been reported in Vitalife victims. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Stone lay in intensive care, surrounded by machines monitoring every aspect of his vital signs. The prognosis was grim paralysis from the waist down, possibly permanent. The same man who had dismissed the suffering of others as acceptable risks now faced a future defined by disability and dependence. News of the accident spread quickly through the corporate grapevine. By morning, the story had hit the media, generating a tsunami of reactions ranging from sympathy to schadenfreude. Social media exploded with comments about karmic justice, while Stone Pharmaceuticals' stock price plummeted on fears of leadership instability. In his moments of consciousness, Stone experienced something entirely new to him: powerlessness. Unable to move, dependent on others for every basic need, he could only listen as doctors discussed his condition in the clinical terms he had once used to dismiss others' suffering. The pain, unmanaged by safer but less effective medications, became his constant companion. The first week in ICU stripped away every vestige of the control he had built his life around. His expensive suits were replaced by a hospital gown, his commanding voice reduced to whispers between surgeries. The doctors spoke of long-term rehabilitation and adapting to new limitations, phrases that hit him with the same force as the crash barrier had. Visitors were few. Board members sent formal wishes for recovery while quietly initiating procedures to protect the company from its founder's absence. His daughter Catherine appeared briefly, her visit more obligation than comfort. The small room, despite its private status and premium location in the hospital, felt increasingly like a prison cell where he was forced to confront the consequences of his choices. The betrayal began before Stone had even regained full consciousness. In an emergency board meeting convened in his absence, James Richardson presented a compelling case for temporary leadership transition. The vote was unanimous. By the time Stone was lucid enough to check his emails, he had already been stripped of his CEO position, relegated to the ceremonial role of chairman emeritus. His personal attorney, David Mitchell, arrived with even worse news. Shareholders had filed multiple class action lawsuits while federal investigators were building a criminal case around Vitalife's approval process. The company's insurance would not cover legal fees related to intentional wrongdoing. Stone's personal fortune, once seemingly untouchable, was now vulnerable to endless litigation. Catherine's second visit was brief and painful. "Dad," she said, standing at the foot of his bed, "the trustees have recommended liquidating your personal assets before they're frozen by the courts. They need your signature." Her voice, professional and detached, reminded him of himself in countless boardroom meetings. When he refused to sign, she left without saying goodbye. The media circus outside the hospital grew daily. News vans camped in the parking lot, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like accusing fingers. Victoria Hayes, his once loyal PR director, resigned with a public letter expressing her moral awakening about the company's practices. The New York Times ran it on their front page. Inside his private room, Stone watched his empire crumble through news alerts on a tablet he could barely hold. Stock prices fell like a stone, triggering margin calls on loans he'd secured with his shares. The financial infrastructure he'd built over decades began to collapse like a house of cards. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of his former life. His ex-wives emerged from the woodwork, their lawyers seeking to protect their settlement agreements before his assets vanished. The second wife, Jennifer, gave a tearful interview to a morning show describing him as a man who sold his soul for profit. The fact that she was wearing jewelry he'd bought her didn't escape his notice. Former colleagues and business partners quickly distanced themselves. Invitations to serve on corporate boards were rescinded. The charitable foundations he'd supported issued statements reevaluating their relationship with their donor. His name was quietly removed from the wing of a hospital he'd funded. The social isolation became as painful as his physical injuries. The final blow came from Robert Turner, his legal chief and longtime confidant. In exchange for immunity, Turner had turned state's evidence, providing prosecutors with detailed documentation of the corruption surrounding Vitalife's approval. His testimony implicated Stone in a conspiracy that stretched back years, involving multiple drugs and countless violations. Even his luxury penthouse, his sanctuary of control, was lost. The board of directors, citing company ownership of the property, served him with eviction notices while he lay in his hospital bed. His protests that he'd paid for it personally were met with evidence that company funds had been used, another detail Turner had revealed. In the hospital, Stone's world shrunk to the dimensions of his room. The nurses treated him professionally but without warmth, some having lost family members to Vitalife. Dr. Rodriguez continued to oversee his care, her ethical commitment to healing extending even to the man whose decisions had harmed so many. The only person who seemed immune to the general exodus was Thomas Wright, his executive assistant. Wright continued to visit daily, managing what remained of Stone's personal affairs with the same quiet efficiency he'd always shown. When Stone asked why he stayed, Wright simply replied, "Everyone deserves one person who remembers their humanity." Lying in his bed, unable to feel his legs, Stone began to experience something new: silence. No phones ringing, no meetings to attend, no decisions to make. In this unwanted quiet, the voices of those he'd hurt began to echo in his mind. The faces of Vitalife victims, once statistics in reports, now haunted his sleepless nights. Maria Thompson entered Marcus Stone's life on a rainy Tuesday morning 3 weeks into his hospital stay. She wasn't supposed to be his nurse's aide, she was filling in for someone else. At 62, with silver-streaked hair and quiet efficiency, she seemed unremarkable among the parade of healthcare workers who managed his daily care. The first thing Stone noticed was that she didn't avoid eye contact like the others. When she helped him with his morning routine, her movements were gentle but confident, her manner neither condemning nor pitying. She hummed softly while working old hymns he vaguely recognized from his childhood. "You have gentle hands," he commented one morning, surprised by his own desire to break the comfortable silence. Maria paused briefly, then continued adjusting his pillows. "God gave them to me for healing," she replied simply. Stone scoffed reflexively, but something in her calm certainty made his usual atheistic retorts die in his throat. Their conversations began slowly during the long hours of physical therapy and personal care. Maria spoke little of herself at first, instead asking questions that no one else bothered with anymore. Not about the scandal or his company, but about his childhood, his father's pharmacy, his early dreams before money became his god. It was 2 weeks into their daily interactions when Stone learned the truth. He was watching the news on his tablet, another story about Vitalife victims, when Maria's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted his IV. On the screen was a familiar face: Michael Thompson, described as one of the first victims of the medication's side effects. "He was my husband," Maria said quietly, continuing her work. Stone felt the blood drain from his face. "Your husband?" "Why are you here? Why help me?" The questions tumbled out, his voice hoarse with shock and shame. Maria's answer would haunt him for years to come, because hate chains both the hated and the hater. "I choose to be free." That night, unable to sleep, Stone asked the night nurse to bring Maria to his room if she was still in the building. When she arrived, still in her uniform despite her shift having ended, he demanded the full story. Maria sat in the visitor's chair and, for the first time, shared her journey. Michael Thompson had been a high school music teacher beloved by his students. When chronic back pain threatened his ability to conduct the school orchestra, his doctor prescribed Vitalife. 3 months later, he collapsed during a rehearsal. The autopsy revealed the same cardiac complications that would later become horrifyingly familiar to medical examiners across the country. "I was angry," Maria admitted, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "I wanted someone to blame. I read every article about your company, about you. I planned to join the lawsuits to demand justice." She paused, smoothing her uniform with hands that had once held her dying husband. "But then I remembered what Michael always said about his music harmony cannot exist in the presence of revenge." Stone listened, unable to look away as Maria described her journey from grief to forgiveness. She spoke of long nights wrestling with her faith, of the moment she realized that carrying hatred was betraying everything her husband had taught their students about grace and transformation. "When I heard about your accident," she continued, "I requested the transfer to this unit. Not because I had forgiven you entirely. Forgiveness is a daily choice. But because I believed that someone needed to show you the same mercy I hoped to receive in my own brokenness." The confession hung between them in the sterile hospital air. Stone, who had built his empire on cold logic and dismissal of emotional weakness, found himself overwhelmed by the profound irony of his situation. The widow of a man his greed had killed was now helping to heal him. "I don't deserve your kindness," he whispered, his voice cracking. Maria stood, adjusting his blanket with those gentle hands that had once held her dying husband. "Deserving has nothing to do with it," she replied. "Grace, by definition, cannot be earned. That's what makes it powerful." From that night forward, something shifted in their interactions. Maria began sharing more about her faith, not through preaching but through small acts of kindness and quiet observations. She brought him books from her church's library when she noticed him growing tired of endless television news. Sometimes she would read to him during her breaks, her voice steady and soothing as she shared stories of redemption and transformation. Federal agents arrived at New York Presbyterian on a cold December morning. Despite his medical condition, the evidence against Stone was too overwhelming to delay prosecution. The arrest was conducted quietly, with consideration for hospital protocols, but the headline screamed across every media outlet: "Fallen Pharma CEO arrested in hospital bed." The transition to the prison medical facility was humbling. Stone's private room with its city views was replaced by a sterile, guarded ward. His custom wheelchair, ordered by Thomas Wright, was exchanged for a standard-issue model. The familiar faces of his care team, even those who treated him coldly, were replaced by prison medical staff who saw him as just another inmate. Maria had pressed a small Bible into his hands before he left, inscribed with a simple message: "Sometimes we must lose everything to find what truly matters." He had accepted it awkwardly, unused to such gestures. Now, in the long hours between medical checks and legal visits, he found himself opening its pages, seeking something he couldn't name. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. His own former executives testified against him, each trying to minimize their role in the Vitalife scandal. Stone watched from his wheelchair as people he had once trusted detailed years of corruption, bribery, and willful negligence. The evidence was damning: emails, meeting recordings, altered test results, all pointing to his direct involvement. In a surprise move that shocked his legal team, Stone pleaded guilty to all charges. "I cannot undo the debts I caused," he told the court, his voice steady despite his physical weakness, "but I can accept responsibility for them." The judge, moved by his confession but bound by the law, sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. The prison medical ward became his world. Physical therapy continued, though without the advanced equipment of the private hospital. Some feeling had returned to his legs, but walking remained a distant goal. The other inmates largely ignored him, except for one who recognized him as the maker of the drug that had killed his sister. Nights were the hardest. Physical pain, managed now with basic medications, kept him awake. In these dark hours, faces haunted him: Michael Thompson conducting his orchestra, Linda Martinez at her daughter's soccer game, countless others whose lives his greed had cut short. The weight of their lost futures pressed on his chest like a physical thing. Thomas Wright visited weekly, bringing news of the outside world and managing what remained of Stone's personal affairs. Most of his assets had been seized or frozen, but Wright had managed to secure a modest trust for his basic needs. More importantly, he brought letters from Maria, her words of encouragement becoming a lifeline to something beyond his confined existence. Stone began keeping a journal, something he had dismissed as sentimental in his previous life. In it, he meticulously recorded his thoughts, his regrets, and increasingly his questions about faith and redemption. The man who had once mocked religion as a crutch for the weak found himself drawn to the stories of transformation in the Bible Maria had given him. Prison chaplain visits, once rejected, became regular occurrences. Father James, a quiet man with graying hair, never pushed or preached. Instead, he listened as Stone wrestled with questions of guilt, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. Their discussions often lasted hours, ranging from theology to ethics to the nature of true repentance. The most difficult part was confronting his own identity. Without his wealth, power, and status, who was Marcus Stone? The question haunted him as he watched his former life disintegrate through occasional news reports. Stone Pharmaceuticals was reorganized, his name removed from the company he had built. His innovations in drug development, once his pride, were now cited in medical ethics courses as examples of corporate greed. Yet in this stripping away of everything he had once valued, Stone began to discover something new. The nurses who tended his medical needs noticed him saying thank you more often. Other inmates in the medical ward found him willing to listen to their stories without judgment. Slowly, imperceptibly, the man who had once seen people as profit margins began to see them as human beings. 6 months into his sentence, Stone experienced what the prison doctor called a severe medical setback. The paralysis in his legs, which had shown signs of improvement, suddenly worsened. Pain, sharp and constant, became his constant companion. The prison medical staff, limited in their resources, could offer little beyond basic pain management. On a particularly difficult night, racked with pain and unable to sleep, Stone asked to be taken to the prison chapel. It was an unusual request from a man who had once proudly proclaimed his atheism, but the night guard, noting his obvious distress, agreed. The small chapel, lit only by moonlight through its simple stained glass windows, felt worlds away from the stark prison medical ward. For the first time in his life, Marcus Stone prayed. Not the polished, performative prayers he'd endured at business functions, but a raw, desperate plea born of complete helplessness. "I don't know if you're there," he whispered into the darkness, "but I can't carry this alone anymore. I don't even know if I deserve to be heard, after everything I've done." The pain in his legs intensified, bringing tears to his eyes. In his former life, he would have immediately called for medication. Instead, he continued talking to the God he wasn't sure existed. "I understand now," he said, his voice breaking. "This is what they felt, all those people I hurt. This helplessness, this pain, I gave them this." Hours passed as Stone poured out his guilt, his fear, his regret. He spoke of Michael Thompson, of Linda Martinez, of countless others whose lives his greed had destroyed. He spoke of his daughter Catherine, of all the years he'd chosen profit over love. In the quiet chapel, the mighty Marcus Stone wept like a child. What happened next would be debated by doctors and skeptics for years to come. Stone described feeling a warmth spreading through his body, starting from his chest and flowing down to his paralyzed legs. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, not the artificial relief of painkillers, but something deeper, more fundamental. Without thinking, Stone pushed himself up from his wheelchair. His legs, which had refused to support him for months, suddenly held firm. Step by step, he walked the length of the chapel, his movement witnessed only by the stunned night guard who had accompanied him. The prison medical staff was baffled. Tests showed increased nerve response in his legs, improved circulation, and reduced inflammation. The prison doctor, a skeptical man by nature, could only say sometimes the body does things we can't explain. But Stone knew it was more than that. News of his recovery spread through the prison like wildfire. Some inmates saw it as divine intervention, others as a convenient miracle for a rich man. Stone himself remained quietly certain of what had happened, though he spoke of it rarely and humbly. The physical healing, however, was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Stone experienced what he later described as a deeper restoration. The bitter anger that had fueled his defense of vital life melted away, replaced by a profound sense of responsibility and purpose. He wrote to Maria immediately, describing his experience in the chapel. Her response was characteristically gentle. "Physical healing is a miracle, but the greater miracle is the healing of a hardened heart." These words would become a touchstone for Stone in the months and years that followed. The prison chapel became his sanctuary. Each morning, before most inmates were awake, he could be found there, wheelchair abandoned, walking slowly between the pews, deep in prayer or contemplation. The man who had once trusted only in numbers and profit margins was learning a new kind of mathematics, the incalculable equation of grace. Stone's transformation manifested in ways that surprised both prison staff and fellow inmates. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with ruthless efficiency now spent hours listening to other inmates' stories in the medical ward. His former skills in organization and leadership found new purpose as he helped establish a support group for inmates struggling with medical conditions. Using his deep knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry, he began writing a detailed confession not just of his legal crimes, but of the entire system of corporate corruption he had helped build. This document, which would later become crucial evidence in reforming drug approval processes, named names, detailed methods, and exposed the intricate web of influence that had prioritized profits over human lives. The most visible change came in his interaction with visitors. When families of Vitalife victims began requesting meetings, Stone didn't hide behind legal advice. He met with each one, listening to their stories, accepting their anger, and offering genuine remorse. These meetings, though emotionally devastating, became part of his healing process. One such meeting particularly marked his transformation. Jenny Martinez, Linda's teenage daughter, came with her father to confront the man responsible for her mother's death. Stone listened as she described watching her mother collapse at her soccer game, the months of birthdays and holidays without her, the graduation her mother would never see. Instead of defending himself, Stone simply said, "I can't bring your mother back, but I can spend the rest of my life working to ensure no other daughter loses her mother this way." His legal team, still hoping to reduce his sentence, was horrified when Stone began refusing to sign appeal paperwork. "My healing doesn't come from avoiding consequences," he explained. "It comes from accepting them and trying to create something meaningful from them." He redirected their efforts toward helping victims' families navigate their compensation claims. Through Thomas Wright, Stone began the process of liquidating his remaining personal assets, art collections, properties, investments that hadn't been seized. The proceeds went to establishing a foundation for families affected by pharmaceutical negligence. The man who had once hoarded wealth now found joy in giving it away. In the prison library, Stone immersed himself in books about ethics, philosophy, and faith. His conversations with Father James deepened, moving beyond personal guilt to questions of systemic change and social responsibility. He began drafting proposals for pharmaceutical industry reform, drawing on his insider knowledge to identify critical points where profit motives compromised safety. Maria's influence remained constant through letters and occasional visits. When Stone shared his struggles with forgiveness, not from others, but forgiving himself, she wrote, "Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating a new future from the lessons of our mistakes." These words became the foundation of his emerging mission. Prison officials noted the change in their high-profile inmate. The arrogance that had marked his early days was replaced by a humble determination. He voluntarily took on maintenance work in the medical ward, no longer seeing manual labor as beneath him. Other inmates began seeking his advice, drawn to the authentic change they witnessed. Perhaps the most profound transformation was invisible to others. In quiet moments, Stone found himself praying not for release or comfort, but for opportunities to make amends. The man who had once dismissed faith as weakness now found in it a strength he had never known, the strength to face his guilt without being destroyed by it. Thomas Wright, visiting one day, commented on the change in his former boss. "You seem at peace," he observed. Stone's response reflected his transformation. "I lost everything I thought mattered, only to find what actually does. There's a strange freedom in that." Stone's story began attracting media attention, though not in the way he had once courted publicity. Journalists noted the stark contrast between the ruthless CEO and the changed man who now worked to expose industry corruption while accepting full responsibility for his part in it. Even skeptics had to acknowledge that something profound had occurred in the life of Marcus Stone. As Marcus Stone's powerful journey of redemption unfolds, we invite you to join our community of believers and seekers of truth. By subscribing to our channel, you'll be part of sharing these inspiring stories of faith, forgiveness, and transformation with those who need them most. The true cost of Stone's transformation became apparent in the months following his spiritual awakening. His daughter Catherine finally visited, bringing paperwork for him to relinquish his remaining claims to the family trust. "The lawyers say it's the only way to protect something for your grandchildren," she explained, not meeting his eyes. "If you still care about family legacy." Stone signed without hesitation, a gesture that seemed to surprise Catherine more than his newfound faith. "The only legacy that matters now is making things right," he told her. The trust would later provide full scholarships for children who had lost parents to pharmaceutical negligence. His decision to reject appeal opportunities and accept his full sentence strained even his most loyal relationships. Thomas Wright argued passionately against it. "You could do more good outside these walls." Stone's response reflected his changed perspective. "Sometimes the most powerful testimony is accepting the full weight of our choices." The hardest blow came when his legal team presented a strategy to protect some of his overseas assets. The plan was perfectly legal, involving complex international banking laws. The old Marcus Stone would have approved it instantly. The transformed man refused, insisting every penny go to victim compensation. His lawyers resigned, calling him irrationally self-destructive. Media coverage of his decision sparked intense debate. Financial publications labeled him mentally unstable, suggesting his accident and imprisonment had broken his judgment. Former business associates publicly distanced themselves, treating his transformation as a kind of contagious madness that might taint them by association. The prison mailroom recorded a sharp decline in his correspondence. Holiday cards from former colleagues stopped arriving. Invitations to serve on post-release corporate ethics boards were withdrawn. The business world that had once celebrated his ruthless efficiency now viewed his moral awakening as a betrayal of their shared values. Even Maria, his steadfast supporter, questioned whether he was taking responsibility too far. "Redemption doesn't require destitution," she wrote. Stone's response revealed his deepened understanding. "It's not about punishment. Everything I owned was built on others' suffering. I can't keep those fruits and claim to be truly changed." Stone began experiencing what he called the gift of having nothing. His designer suits were donated to prisoner rehabilitation programs. His art collection was auctioned for victim compensation. The penthouse he'd once fought to keep was sold, the proceeds establishing a medical support fund for low-income families. Stone's spiritual journey entered its darkest phase during his second year of imprisonment. The initial fervor of his conversion faced its first real test when he received word that Linda Martinez's youngest daughter had attempted suicide, overwhelmed by her mother's absence during her crucial teenage years. The news shook him to his core, forcing him to confront the ripple effects of his actions across generations. Nights became battlegrounds of doubt and self-recrimination. The prison chapel, once his sanctuary, felt empty and silent. His prayers, previously flowing with newfound faith, became desperate whispers. How can any amount of redemption compensate for such pain? The guard who had witnessed his miraculous healing now watched him struggle with his wheelchair on particularly difficult nights. Sarah Williams, his former head of research, sent him a letter detailing how his actions had destroyed not just lives but also faith in medical science. Patients were refusing necessary medications out of fear, she reported. Some doctors had left the profession disillusioned by the corruption he had championed. The weight of these indirect consequences threatened to overwhelm his fragile faith. Questions plagued him. Was his conversion genuine, or just another form of self-protection? Had he truly changed, or was he simply adapting to his circumstances? The prison psychologist noted signs of deep depression, recommending increased medication. Stone refused, choosing instead to face his demons with clear consciousness. His Bible study group noticed his withdrawal. Where he had once offered insights and encouragement, he now sat silently, wrestling with doubts too profound for words. Father James found him one evening, tears streaming down his face as he read accounts of children orphaned by Vital Life's effects. "I thought finding faith would make the guilt easier," Stone confessed. "Instead, it's made it more acute." The prison grapevine carried whispers of his struggles. Some inmates interpreted his crisis as proof that his transformation had been an act. Others, particularly those who had witnessed his earlier sincerity, worried about his mental state. A few began including him in their prayers, moved by the sight of a broken man grappling with the enormity of his past. Maria's letters became his lifeline during this period. She wrote of her own dark nights of the soul after Michael's death, of questioning God's presence in the midst of suffering. True faith, she reminded him, isn't about feeling God's presence. It's about trusting even in His apparent absence. The turning point came unexpectedly. A young inmate newly arrived in the medical ward recognized Stone from news coverage about Vitalife. Instead of anger, the man shared that Stone's public confession had given him courage to admit his own crimes. "If someone like you can change," he said, "maybe there's hope for the rest of us." Sarah Williams's return to Stone's life came through an unexpected channel. 3 years into his sentence, she requested a meeting through the prison's visitation program. When Stone entered the visiting room, he hardly recognized the woman who had once been his head of research. Gone was the corporate attire, replaced by casual clothes and a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with professional status. "I've been following your transformation," she began without preamble. "At first I thought it was another PR strategy." She placed a thick folder on the table between them. "But then I started receiving these copies of your letters to victims' families, transcripts of your testimony against industry corruption, reports of your refused appeals." Stone waited, sensing there was more. Sarah had always been methodical in her presentations, building her case point by point. Some habits, it seemed, survived even the most dramatic life changes. Her next words caught him completely off guard. "I'm heading a new research initiative. We're developing alternative pain medications, ones that put safety before profit margins." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Here was his former employee, whom he had fired for prioritizing safety, now leading the charge to fix the very problems he had created. But Sarah wasn't finished. "We've made a breakthrough," she continued. "A new compound that could help patients like you without the risks of Vitalife." Stone shook his head. "I don't deserve," but Sarah cut him off. "This isn't about what you deserve, it's about what you can still do to help." She opened the folder, revealing research data, clinical trial results, and most surprisingly, letters of support from some of Vitalife's victims' families. "They're willing to support the research," Sarah explained. "Some have even volunteered for trials. They say your letters, your complete acceptance of responsibility, helped them find closure." She leaned forward, her voice intense. "But we need your expertise. Not as a CEO, but as someone who knows exactly how the system can be corrupted and how to prevent it." Stone stared at the documents, his hands trembling slightly. "Why now?" he asked. "Why me?" Sarah's answer reflected years of careful thought, because true redemption isn't just about accepting punishment. It's about using our experiences, even our worst mistakes, to prevent future suffering. The proposal she outlined was unexpected. Stone would serve as an ethics consultant for the project, working through written correspondence from prison. His role would be to identify potential safety compromises before they occurred, to spot the subtle ways profit motives could interfere with patient safety. In the wake of Sarah's visit, Maria Thompson chose to share her own revelation. She arrived at the prison on a Sunday afternoon, carrying a worn leather portfolio she had never brought before. Stone noticed immediately that something was different. Her usual serene expression carried an undertone of nervous anticipation. "Michael kept a journal," she began, placing the portfolio on the visitor's room table. "I found it while cleaning out his music room last month. He wrote about Vitalife, about the pain, but also about something else." She carefully extracted several handwritten pages, their edges soft with age. The journal entries detailed Michael's last months, not just his physical decline, but his spiritual journey. He had written about his students, about the music he could still create despite the pain, and surprisingly, about forgiveness. The final entry, dated just days before his death, contained words that would forever change Stone's understanding of redemption. "If this medication takes my life," Michael had written, "I pray it somehow becomes a catalyst for change. Not for vengeance, but for transformation. Sometimes the greatest symphonies arise from the deepest dissonance." Maria's voice trembled as she read these words aloud, her hands gentle on the weathered pages. Stone sat in stunned silence as Maria revealed more. Michael, in his final weeks, had gathered his advanced students and taught them about harmony, not just in music, but in life. He spoke about how the resolution of discord created the most beautiful progressions, how darkness made light more visible, how pain could lead to profound purpose. "He knew," Maria said softly. "Somehow he knew that his death would matter beyond itself. When I heard about your change, about your work with Sarah's research team, I realized Michael's prayer was being answered in ways none of us could have imagined. She reached across the table, taking Stone's hand. You're part of the resolution he wrote about. The revelation shifted something fundamental in Stone's understanding of his journey. His transformation wasn't just about personal redemption, it was part of a larger composition, one that Michael Thompson had somehow foreseen in his final days. The man he had killed had, in some mysterious way, prophesied his redemption. Maria shared more from the journal: Michael's hopes for his students, his reflections on suffering, his belief that even the darkest experiences could serve a greater purpose. He wrote that true harmony often requires a journey through dissonance, she explained. Your story, Marcus, is proving him right. The meeting ended with Maria gifting Stone a copy of the journal's final pages. Michael would want you to have these, she said. Not to increase your guilt, but to show you that redemption was always part of this story even before you knew you needed it. The final year of Stone's sentence marked the beginning rather than the end of his redemption story. Sarah's research team, incorporating his insights, developed a revolutionary approach to pain management that prioritized safety without compromising effectiveness. The new medication, named Thompson Care in honor of Michael, began showing promising results in clinical trials. Stone's role evolved beyond consulting on safety protocols. His detailed knowledge of industry manipulation helped create an unprecedented transparency system for drug development. Every test result, every adverse reaction, every financial transaction was made public. The pharmaceutical industry initially resisted this Stone protocol, but public pressure and support from victims' families made it increasingly difficult to maintain old secretive practices. Catherine returned to his life, drawn by curiosity about her father's work with Sarah's team. She attended a presentation where Stone, speaking via video conference from prison, outlined the ethical framework for Thompson Care's development. I saw a different man, she later wrote in her journal. Not the father who chased profits, but someone who finally found his true purpose. The Victim Support Foundation, now managed by a board that included both Sarah and Maria, expanded its mission. Beyond providing financial support, it became a powerful advocate for industry reform. Former Vitally victims and their families, once united in grief, found new purpose in ensuring their tragedy sparked lasting change. Stone's prison cell became an unlikely center for healthcare ethics discussions. Medical students, industry whistleblowers, and reform advocates sought his insight. Each conversation deepened his commitment to transformation, not just of himself, but of the system he had once exploited. Maria's weekly visits continued, but their discussions shifted from personal healing to broader questions of purpose. Michael's music students are following the research she shared. They see how their teacher's death is creating ripples of positive change. It's becoming part of their understanding of harmony in the world. The prison chapel, where Stone had experienced his physical healing, became a gathering place for a small group focused on ethical business practices. Even some of the guards joined these discussions, drawn by the authentic change they witnessed in their high-profile inmate. As his release date approached, Stone received an unexpected letter from Linda Martinez's daughter, Jenny. She had enrolled in medical school, inspired by the changes she'd witnessed in the industry. Your story taught me that transformation is possible, she wrote. Not just for individuals, but for entire systems that seem beyond redemption. Stone's release from prison occurred without fanfare or media attention, exactly as he had requested. Maria and Sarah waited outside the gates, along with Thomas Wright, who had remained faithful through the entire journey. Instead of returning to Manhattan, Stone chose to relocate to a modest apartment near Sarah's research facility, where he could continue his work with the development team. Thompson Care's successful launch marked a new era in pharmaceutical development. The medication's remarkably clean safety profile, combined with its effectiveness, proved that ethical drug development could be both sustainable and profitable. More significantly, the transparent development process became a model for industry reform, with several major companies adopting the Stone protocol. At the first anniversary of Thompson Care's release, Stone attended a memorial service for Vitalife victims. Standing at the podium beside Maria, he didn't offer excuses or seek sympathy. Instead, he shared how their loved ones' deaths had sparked a revolution in drug safety. The family's tears were no longer just of grief, but of hope that their loss had created lasting change. Catherine's relationship with her father deepened as she became involved in the foundation's work. She discovered a side of him she had never known: patient, humble, genuinely interested in others' well-being. Their weekly dinners became a time of healing for both as they rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of shared values rather than material success. The prison chapel where Stone had experienced his miracle became a symbol of transformation. Regular gatherings there brought together former inmates, medical professionals, and families affected by pharmaceutical negligence. These meetings bridged divides between groups that would never otherwise have connected, creating a community united by the belief in redemption. Sarah's research team expanded, with Stone serving as ethics advisor. His office, deliberately modest, displayed only 2 items: Michael Thompson's framed journal entry about harmony arising from dissonance and a simple cross Maria had given him in prison. These daily reminders kept him focused on the true measure of success: lives protected rather than profits earned. In an unexpected development, Jenny Martinez joined the research team after completing medical school. Her presence was a daily reminder of both the cost of past mistakes and the possibility of future redemption. She and Stone developed a close mentoring relationship, her forgiveness and dedication touching everyone who knew their history. On the day Thompson Care received its final approval, Stone visited Michael's grave with Maria. Together they placed a copy of the approval letter beside the headstone. "Your death created life," Stone whispered. "Your dissonance truly did lead to harmony." Maria squeezed his hand, their shared tears falling on the grass growing over her husband's grave. Stone never returned to his former wealth or status, choosing instead to live modestly and continue his work in pharmaceutical reform. His testimony before congressional committees helped shape new legislation on drug safety, while his regular speaking engagements at medical schools influenced a new generation of healthcare professionals. The story of Marcus Stone's transformation became a case study in authentic redemption. Not the easy redemption of public apologies and charitable donations, but the costly redemption of complete surrender and genuine change. His journey from profit-driven CEO to humble advocate for reform demonstrated that no life was beyond the reach of grace, and no mistake too great for redemption. As he often reminded the medical students he now mentored, success isn't measured in dollars or data anymore. It's measured in lives protected, in families kept whole, in pain prevented. That's the only metric that truly matters. If this story of faith, redemption, and transformation has touched your heart, please take a moment to support our team by subscribing to our channel. Share this video with friends and family who might find hope in Marcus Stone's journey. Your likes and comments mean the world to us. Let us know in the comments section below how this story resonated with you and what emotions it stirred. Would you like to hear part 2 of this extraordinary journey? Your